So let's look at a couple of examples of what Camus kind of considers to be this confrontation between the absurd and the reality that we're living in, right? And so what we look at, right? Camus starts with this idea that it is a very, very serious concern, right? This idea of suicide, either real or philosophical, what he would call philosophical suicide, abandoning, right, a belief, basically, killing it in order to, become, in order to deal better with the world, right? We can talk about that a little bit later. But what he really wants to get to is that this confrontation, right, between, right, the way that life is, the way that you want it to be, the fact that you ask for responses, that there are no responses given. Again, this is an atheistic position in most cases, right, very much like Sartre. If there is a God, right, according to Sartre and to Camus, right, then there is no interaction, right, that there is a creator who set the watch and walked away. Or in the case, really, of Camus and Sartre, right, there is none, right? We cannot rely on that, right, according to them. And because we can't rely on that, we can't rely on anything to give us responses to the problems that we run into in life, right? That we run into situations that seem unfair. We can point to the plague and to say that the death of a child from, the plague is neither evidence of a God nor evidence of the absence of a God. It is simply a thing that happens that we must decide how to confront, right, in and of ourselves, right? There's a lot of absurdity there. The innocence of a child who has done nothing, the ravages of a disease that has no master, it simply does what a disease does. That both of these situations, when confronted, appear absurd, right? A child who has acted in a certain way, run out in front of a car, jumped off of a building, fallen into the ocean, at least can be understood as somebody acted, and the response of the way the world is simply, if you act in this way, then you will die. But in the plague, we're very much aware that the child who contracts the plague has done nothing to deserve it, right? Did not ask to be born, did not ask to be in the city, probably had very little choice about where he was living, did what they could to not contract a disease, but when they contracted it, died, right? And so this is the absurd, right? There's on page 5 of the Myth of Sisyphus, Camus does say, right, a day comes when a man notices or says that he is 30, thus he asserts his youth, but simultaneously he situates himself in relation to time, he takes his place in it, he admits that he stands at a certain point on a curve, that he acknowledges having to travel to its end. He belongs to time, and by the horror that seizes him, he recognizes his worst enemy. Tomorrow, he was longing for tomorrow, tomorrow. He was longing for tomorrow, whereas everything in him ought to reject it. That revolt of the flesh is the absurd, right? That we see that there is a path, there is a place, right, at which we must confront death, and that is also the beginning of the absurd, that life cannot exist without death. That sort of becomes a bit of an issue, right? And we continue to sort of look at this idea of, how this confrontation between, two separate things, that contradiction is itself the absurd. It's not one or the other. It's not life. It's not death. It's not realizing that one is about to, enter into, realistically thinking about time and thinking about the idea that at some point in time everything ends. It is the confrontation, right, of how we do look forward to, right, tomorrow, and we have plans, and we do things that we have things that we plan, vacations and graduations, and yet, right, it's all a reminder of the trajectory that we are on. Is that a little bit dark? Is it a little bit maybe over dramatic? Quite possibly, right? When we look at that, I think we can easily see that it feels a little bit over dramatic, but it's that confrontation, right? The unreasonable silence of the world and the questions that we have for it. That is where we come into the absurd. So, how does that relate to some of the other stuff we looked at this week? The video that we're going to talk about next, right? We're going to be talking a little bit about art and a little bit about the idea of the Dada movement. That we're going to talk more about Dada a little bit later, but we're going to start talking a little bit about surrealism and art and this period of time between world wars as a period in which, right, we can see how the absurd is sort of formed in the minds of authors and artists. So we'll cover that next.